These aren't the stories your mother told you. No, these are the other stories.
Today's episode of The Other Stories is Intermission, Reanimated, written by Ben Errington and narrated by James Barnett, aka Jimmy Horace.
I've got used to hiding. I've been doing it for most of my life. Luckily, I'm a nobody. No hobbies or interests and not a single friend. All I have are my linear days, from work to home and back again. Eating and sleeping and masturbating, and staring aimlessly out of windows and into screens and at my sunken eyes in the mirror. I know how it got this bad. I drifted into mediocrity and obscurity, and there was nothing I could have done to stop it. I slipped down into the mundane depths, and I've been wallowing there for years, not enjoying it, which would be ridiculous, but living with it. Not finding it hard to get up in the morning or to smile at a colleague, or to tell the shop assistant to have a good weekend. None of them know how pathetic my existence had come to be. They wouldn't be interested anyway. If I was hit by a car while crossing a road, my ID left in my wallet at home, or if I died of heart or liver failure on my sofa within those familiar four walls, I'm not sure anybody would notice. I didn't go to the office for 4 whole days once, and I felt nervous about calling in to tell my supervisor that I was feeling unwell. When I returned, nobody said a word. My payslip was the same as it had always been at the end of the month, and there were no repercussions about my absence. It was like I was a ghost. That's why I felt no fear when I saw the lights again. I heard the voices that sounded like a choir of 1,000 children singing words from an ancient language that I couldn't understand. Just like I had the first time. I went to them because I knew that they were calling to me. They remembered me. They'd come back for me. I'd seen them for the first time as a child when I stood in the garden of the house where I grew up. They hovered still in the sky and pulsated and screamed when they flew off into the darkness. They were monitoring me, but after my parents died, they didn't return. Not until my teens, that is, where I'd continued to live in the same house, but now with my grandparents, who had thought it was best that I stayed in familiar surroundings after such a terrible tragedy. The lights appeared again, but they looked different this time. It was as if they'd aged a century. It's hard to explain, but the brightness that they once had that burned my eyes and made my skin feel hot had gone. It was like staring into the eyes of an elderly person with dementia. What was there had gone forever and can never come back. Not in the same way, at least. It was then that I realised they were a beacon. They brought warning to me of something awful that was to happen. The first time it had been my parents' death, but the second time I didn't want to find out, so I ran. Years upon years had passed, and fear had turned to frustration, and frustration had turned to anger, or something like it. Now the anger was worn away somewhat, to something that feels more like curiosity. Why had I been chosen by them? When the lights returned outside my ground floor flat window, hanging in the sky, finally catching up to me after so long, I felt relief. I suppose I should have been scared. Fucking terrified, in fact. But it wasn't fear that I felt. Not at all. It was an overwhelming sense of calm. I almost felt as if I had willed them to find me. Even though I knew exactly what was happening, I knew that I couldn't fight it. Didn't even want to. I could have struggled. Maybe even pulled myself free of the restraints. But I didn't. Just stared up into the milky white light and revisited a memory I often would, although I'd usually be staring at a mould-spotted ceiling in the early morning while I did. Putting aside trivial worries like what the traffic was going to be like on the way to work, or if I had enough money left in my account to pay my electric bill. The memory was something simple, something my mother had said to me over breakfast one morning when I was thinking about taking a knife to my wrists if I had to endure the punishment of the spiteful at school for one more day. I remembered burnt toast and spilled orange juice in my lap. I love you, and I'm proud of you. You're a good boy. There was a smell of burning hair and a wet slap that sounded like a flap of skin. It hurt a lot, and I wondered why they hadn't taken me the first or second time they came to me. Perhaps I wasn't considered ready for whatever this process seemed to be. I must have passed out because when I came back to consciousness, I wasn't lying on the ground or waking up in my bed like any normal day. I was walking across the familiar street, but the block of flats I once called home had gone, replaced by a much taller white building and an oddly angled glass tower reaching up towards the clouds. I could see furniture and people within it, peering out from the glass like ants in a farm. It was strange, because even the street looked different, cleaner somehow. The paving slabs were new, and even the tarmac was the shiny kind of black it usually was when it is fresh. I looked around for a sign to confirm that I was at my address and not just lost, but I couldn't see one. I could just see an enormous curved plasma screen at the side of the street, displaying weather information and stock market stats, which have always been like a foreign language to me. I made it to work on autopilot, not entirely sure if I had made the journey on foot or on the usual bus. When I arrived, I noticed the building had been completely refurbished. Everything clean and sterile, white walls and large panels of glass. My office wasn't the same, and all the people working there had been replaced. Everybody was so young. One of them said something about my clothes, and another asked me who I was. They all looked at me like I was a crazy person. At least they looked at me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Other Stories. Intermission was written by Ben Errington, narrated by James Barnett, aka Jimmy Horace himself, produced by Carl Hughes with music by Chris Zabriskie and Tom Robson, and sound effects provided by freesound.org. The episode illustration was provided by Luke Spooner of Carry On House. Joshua Boucher is our story programmer, and along with Jasmine Arch and his eyeless ones, Mary Pastrano and Cody Czarzasty, he helps manage our community. And a big thank you to Ben Errington for the ongoing explosion of content he fires out of his social media canon. With his debut novel, 10 Tales of the Human Condition, his novella, Die Pack, and a short story collection called Death Throes, Ben Errington's fast-paced, chaotic, cinematic style has earned him many plaudits. He's also co-founder of the story studio Hawk and Cleaver, along with this podcast, and he's the co-creator of the post-apocalyptic comic book El Marvo and co-host of horror movie discussion podcast Horror Hangout. You can follow Ben on X at Ben_Errington. James Barnett is the producer of the Night's End podcast and After the Gloaming. Search for them wherever you get your podcasts. You can catch other works of his at jamesbarnettcreative.com. The Other Stories is a production of the Story Studio Hawk and Cleaver and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. That means don't change it, don't sell it, but by all means share the hell out of it. Until next time.